Hey everybody, welcome back to the fourth part of this video series. Today we're going to be styling up the center content of the website. It's going to be a lot like the last video, so if you feel like you got a lot out of the last video, you could probably go ahead and skip this one and head on over to the next video. If this one ends up being too long, you may need to skip 2 ahead. So where we left off, we had our header and footer styled up. We're going to add some quick styles to our rotator to give it a height and the basic wrapping styles, and continue on down the page with our surfaces for the website, and then our reusable subheader, and then our portfolio, and then we'll also style up the advertisers. So now I'm one of the people. I'm a type of person. I don't mind having a lot of CSS files. Like I had said in a previous section of this series, I use a minifier to combine all the files. So I like categorizing my style sheets based on where they're used. Our base one's going to be used on every single page, and we know that if we're doing anything globally, we can add it to that base CSS. Now I'm going to create an index CSS, and these styles are going to specifically be used for our index page. So if we were to fully cut out a site with multiple pages, I would have a CSS for the news, a CSS file for the products and features and contacts. But since we're only doing one, right now we're just going to do one. Now let's see here. Alright, so the first element inside of our content is this subheader, or it's not our reusable header, but it is an H2 index. So this one right here, and we have this dashed line below it, so we're going to add a background to the header, set the background position to the bottom. We're also going to add padding of about 40 pixels to the top and bottom to create this space. Now if we were to add margins instead of padding, the background image would show up right below our text, and so padding will end up showing what we're going to do. Well, let's see here, I messed that up already. I was supposed to do the rotator first, but since we already went over that, the header, we'll do that first. So I'm going to add a URL, images, what was it, BG dash. Another dash icon, and we're going to set the position of it to the bottom. It's going to start at the right and repeat X. So this is going to repeat horizontally, and we would do repeat Y if we wanted it to repeat vertically. Font size for it is about 28 pixels. In my other version, looked like the appropriate size. Let's go ahead and check and see what the default one was. So 32. So I'm taking on average between 2 and 4 font sizes away from our PSD, just so it matches up a little bit better. So we're going to set our height, top and bottom padding to 40. And if you notice, we have a center aligned header tag. So I'm going to do text align center. Now this centers the text. It won't center an element. If we inspect the element on our page, did I save? Oh, I need to include my CSS file onto the page. That's will be helpful. Do that. I'll tab back over. So as you can see, if we look at our PSD, the dotted line goes from end to end, and our dotted line goes from end to end here. So I'm going to inspect the element real fast and demonstrate the padding versus margin. So the background becomes inside the thing, inside our header tag. Now I'm going to quickly just add styles for that rotator to give the so we can get the visualization of the the area it's going to use. So it's going to use our traditional green color that we had that we kept in the header of this file. It's going to clear both just to ensure that there are no floats messing up our stuff. It's going to have a height of 415 and it's going to be positioned relative. I'll go over a little bit on relative positioning on when we actually style up the rotator, because we'll be doing a lot with absolute and relative positioning. So right now our site's really starting to look like our PSD. So things are looking good right there. Now our next batch of items we're going to do are these. We're going to style up these icons. Now if you remember what I said in the last video, this element is essentially going to be 3 HTML elements. We're going to have an outer one, we have an inner one, and then we have the innermost one, which is the icon. And so before we get to that, we need to style up the actual wrapping service class. So if we look at this, we have, let's see, so we are going to have margin top of about 40 pixels. We're going to have margin bottom of also margin bottom of 50. We're going to do overflow hidden just so that our floating elements don't overlap. So we'll do 40 pixels, 0, 50, and 0. Overflow hidden. Now the unordered list, we don't need to style anything up on it. Service, spelled it. Services. Now the list items, while we're looking at them, each one has a large margin to the left of about, let's see, it's about 85 pixels. And so if you notice, we butt up on the left and also butt up on the right. To achieve this, you can either add an additional class to this list item element of last child, or you can literally use a CSS pseudo selector, which is what we're going to do. That way we don't have to mess with our markup at all. This won't be supported in all browsers, all legacy browsers. It'll work with modern modern IE, modern Firefox, and Chrome and all that. So each one of those elements, list item elements, are going to float left. And we're going to do a margin right 75 pixels. Just so that we can, I believe I said 85, but we're going to do 75 for safe guessing. We'll adjust it later. So you can see our last one still has this that yellow spot to the right indicates the margin property, Now we want to get rid of that. So we're going to use a pseudo selector to get rid of that. Visual Studio 2013 has some helpful IntelliSense on your CSS now. Earlier versions wasn't so great, but it's going to give us the hint to the proper syntax for last child. We're going to go last child, margin right, 0. So now if we look at it, we see that it doesn't have any margins to the right. Now to the nitty-gritty of the actual disk items. So looking at our code, we have a disk outer class, we have a disk inner, then we have an icon. So we're going to create these styles for those 3 elements real fast. So we're going to do services disk outer. Now I'm doing I'm going to do a child selector on this one, on this icon one, because there aren't going to be any sub-elements or sub-icons, excuse me, to the disk inner. We could also do disk outer right there, but that's going to create a really long CSS rule that is a little redundant. This is going to target the element just as well as the first one. So the disk outer inside of our PSD, it has a white background and a 1 pixel border of, what do we have, ed. And so let's go ahead and set background of white, border 1 pixel, solid, let's see here, wonder if, alright, my other example had DE instead of ed, and it looks like it's a little bit darker of color, so that it'll be better defined. Now let's use our CSS or our Photoshop guides to get a good sizing of this element. So it's about, we're overflowing a little bit, so -1 right there, -1 right there. So our element is 180 pixels wide, and that includes our border. So borders aren't included in your widths. So if you say I want this to be a width of 180, but you have a 1 pixel border, your left and your right pixel borders are going to add on to it. So it actually becomes 182 wide. So what we're going to do is set the width to 178. And we have a little bit of space in between our text and the bottom of our box of about 18 pixels. So we're going to add a margin bottom of 18 pixels. Let's look at it real fast. It may not show up very well. Oh, looks like we don't have a height either. Since it's a circle, we know its height is going to be the same as its width. 178 pixels. Hit F5. So we get a white box with a nice border around it. Let's go ahead and do our disk inner. The background is the same green that we used up here, so I'm just going to copy and paste it from right there. Now let's go over to our PSD and get an approximate height and width of this. So it is 140 pixels tall, so it's going to be 140 pixels wide. Now the challenge to this is that it's not easy to vertically align elements. You can do relative positioning and various methods like that. You could use table cells, which is overly unnecessary. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to use margins. We can easily center align it by doing margin auto to center align it left and right, but it's not going to give us the vertical alignment we're going to need. So as we see with this, it has, let's see here, is this the same? Yeah. So there is 19 pixels of space in between this, so we're going to give it a margin of 19 all the way around, and that's going to give it a good margin to make it appear center aligned. Now if you ever change your height and width, you're going to need to adjust this also. So we're going to give it the 140 pixel height and width, margin of 19 pixels. So we now have a square version of our icons. And now we're going to add the styles to the icon. Now the easiest way how to do this, like I had said, center aligning something, center aligning an element is relatively challenging. To center align a background image, it's a piece of cake. It works in all browsers. It's consistent. And so what I'm going to do is cheat a little bit, and this icon element is going to be 140 by 140. So it's going to take up the entire space of our disk inner, and I'm going to set the background position to center. So background, repeat, no, repeat, background position to center. Now if you notice, I am declaring each I'm not using shorthand for these background properties. It's because for each one of the icons, I'm going to use background image so that I don't overwrite anything, because using background will overwrite any previous rules, longhand rules you have. Height 140 pixels, width 140. So visibly this isn't going to show us anything outside of if we inspect the element with Firebug. You will see that our icon takes up the entire center. Now for time's sake, I'm going to copy and paste over my URLs for those icons, or my rules for those icons, and so we're just doing services.amazing.our web icon mobile dev. You could also, to make this rule more specific, you could do .web icon, but this will make it a little bit more challenging to maintain, and it doesn't look as good. It's not required since we have limited elements on the page. So looks like I had renamed a few classes. So I'm going to hop into my HTML and update those. So we had web and mobile, add web icon, mobile dev. Okay, so this is what this part of the website's going to look like if somebody's browsing it with a legacy version of IE, so IE8, pre-rounded corners. Now, to achieve a perfect circle inside of CSS, we're going to set the border radius to 100%. I'm going to just use the standard border radius property. Now there are vendor prefixes for this. There's a Mozilla one and a WebKit one. However, most of the browsers now automatically support border radius, so you can sometimes get away with just using border radius. You can use CSS 3.12 tools to get the proper ones. 3 generator. So I believe this is the one I've been using for a while. Yeah. So here you can select all your CSS properties, and so with border radius, let's see here, they only do pixels, which doesn't achieve what we're doing. So it gives you the WebKit border radius and the standard one, and they also let you know what browser it supports. And if I remember right, you still have to use WebKit for certain versions of the iPhone. And also gives you, this tool also gives you a nice preview of it. So if we, okay, we're saved, and so if we go back here, hit refresh, we now have round icons. So this is a great way to not have to cut out larger images or additional images, and you can still achieve the same result. Now we need to style up our labels, our header tags down here. We have H3s and H5s. So there. So it's going to be, this is H3. Now the font size is 24 pixels. Text alignment is center. And the margin, bottom, is about 10 pixels. So, as you can see, the text is center aligned, so we're going to use the center align property. Excuse me. And there's about a little less than 15 pixels for the margin. Oh, sorry. Right at 10 pixels. I thought I had said 15. Now for the H5. We're not going to do any margin bottom on it, since our wrapping element does that. Font size of 14 pixels. And then we are also going to do the center align. Center text align. So that part of our website is starting to look good now. Now we are going to cut out this subheader, this reusable subheader that we have right here. That is a little bit more challenging due to this piece right here. What we could do is simply cut out a background image with this center area left out and make it one big wide image. But it looks like, with the text being different widths here, well, foot and mouth. In this instance, the text is right about the same size. However, if you were ever to update this text, you'd have to recut out your image, which wouldn't look that great. So the way we're going to do this is the way we're going to do this is going to be a little bit more flexible and more reusable. So our class was subheader. Let's see here, we have a subheader class and an H4 inside of it. We're going to do a background of our dash background, BT dash. I'm going to do the long or the shorthand version of this property. It's going to be vertically aligned center, and we're going to repeat X. Clear both, just to clean out any floats. Set the height to 20 pixels, and I'll explain why we set it to 20 pixels here shortly. And the margin bottom is going to be 35 pixels. So if we look at it right now, we have the dotted line is going straight through the center of our element. So when we style up our subheader H4 tag, it's going to look a little bit better. So the background, we're going to set the background of this to the same as our body tag. And what this is going to do, it's going to overlay a block of a solid block of background above the background image, so it looks like the background is cut out the way the design does. Set our font size to 20 pixels and our height to 20 pixels and our width to 275. Now if we refresh, we see that we have the background stopping and being overlaid by our element, but it doesn't match up with our PSD just yet. We have margin left that we need to apply of about 36 pixels. And if you also notice, it's not vertically aligning just right. The reason for this is that this background is actually 4 pixels tall. So we're going to need to add some rules to accommodate for that. So I'm going to do padding top of 4 pixels. And then our margin left of 35 pixels. Reorder it so it's better alphabetized. I'm going to F5, and you can see that our element looks a lot more like the PSD now. Let's see. Now we're going to move on to our portfolio items. So as we look at our PSD, the portfolio items are they have a 1 pixel border, so we're going to have the same issue with the size that we did last time. They're about they're 465 pixels. I didn't get the left border on that one, so 465 pixels with a wide. How tall are they? They are 448 pixels tall. So port item border 1 pixel, solid number EBEBEB. They float left, and their width is 465. Alright, so if you look at our, we float these elements so that if this page was wider, this one would end up right there, this one would end up back over there. By floating them, it automatically wraps down, and so if we added another line or another 2 items, they'd appear down here. And so one thing we're going to do is there's a margin bottom and a margin right on each one of these. So our right margin is about 16. Is that right? No. Oh, right. Alright, I'm looking at this. I'm wondering why it's not matching up with what I have right now. I'm sure there's a reason behind it. Our margin bottom does match up of about 25 pixels. If I remember right, something just didn't translate well, which sometimes happens. Cutting out from PSD to HTML, it's difficult to get pixel by pixel accuracy. refresh my page. Oh, my classes are incorrect. I need portfolio item. Refresh. And so now we have our elements floating properly. I need it'll look more consistent once I get the image tags updated. But as you can see, it doesn't match up. The margin to the right doesn't match up how we want. So we're going to do margin right. We had 26 pixels in the PSD. And now we're going to play with this a little bit. So what that does is that it's going to push each one off the page. If we look at our PSD, the one on the left, or I'm sorry, the one on the right is nudged up against our right guide. So we're going to write a CSS selector to target every other element. This helps us not have to put an additional CSS class onto each one of those elements, because what we could do is inside of our HTML we could do even and odds on the portfolio item. This method allows us to update it without write a rule without having to update our markup. So I used a tool to get this and test it. It's called nth child. So in a nutshell, what this does is that it takes, I believe it starts on the second child and then takes every other one. To take every one, I believe it's +0 maybe. Not super sure, since I actually haven't used it that much. This is the first time I've been able to use it in a project, so it's a little bit of an experiment for me. So please forgive me if I said that incorrectly. There was a tool, CSS3 nth child tool. Yeah, this CSS Tricks article, how nth child works, explains it a lot better. If I remember right, he has an nth child tester page. This is what I used to test this. So back to this. Did I save? Yes, I saved. So by refreshing this, I should, yes, it all lines up our portfolio items the way we had expected. Every other one has a margin right, while the other ones do not have a right margin. So let's move on to the inner elements of it. I'm going to go ahead and go into my content and add the image tags for the elements. Open up this. I'm just going to go, alright, so we had port 1, 2, and 3, so there's port 1, port 2, port 3, port 4. Go back into our HTML, make sure they all render the way we expected them to. So it kind of breaks and makes our stuff look a little goofy. Since you can see our text is wrapping down below it, we're going to float this element left, and that way our text bumps up here. Another thing to keep in mind when you have any image tags on your page, you want to set a defined height and width to the element. Your browser is guessing the height and width until the image is loaded, so you can get some broken content. You can get a broken content look on your page until your images are loaded if you don't set a height and width to them. So portfolio item image. Since these are the only image inside the portfolio item, I'm going to just use the image tag. Float them left. Give them a height of 148, width of 227. If I remember right, that's... I'm just going to drag this in here real fast to make sure that's... So yeah, 148, 227. then inside of our PSD, we notice that there is also margin right of about 21 pixels. Is that correct? Yeah, about 21. We'll go ahead and just use 20 so it's even. Margin right 20 pixels. If we go back over here, refresh our page, we see that our content actually looks like what we were initially expecting. We still have some styling to do on this other part though. So our headers, they have a top margin about 15 and a bottom margin of about 10. So we're going to code that out real fast. Page 5. Font size was about 12. Margin 15 pixels for the top, 0 for the right, 10 for the bottom, 0 for the left. Refresh our page to make sure that looks right. It's close enough. It did text transform for us. Alright, next item we're going to do are those hyperlinks on the page. Now, if you notice, they look like buttons. They're also in line. One thing we could do here is we could float these elements left and then clear right here. It's going to require us to set a width for each one of these to work properly. So what we're going to do instead is just set these to inline block. That way we can make them look like the way we want them to. So let's see here, the text color. Well, for starters, it has a background color that matches all of our other green backgrounds. The text color is white. Let's see here, and then our text decoration is none. Let's see what this gets us. So we have very small plain buttons. Then so we're going to have a padding of 3 pixels to the top and bottom and 10 pixels to the left and right. So yeah, it's about 10 there and about 4 there. We'll use 2, or we'll use 3 just since that's what we already have. Refresh the page, we get that. You know, I was gonna say we're gonna have to float those, but it looks like we're not gonna have to. So with our paragraph tag, we are gonna have to set a margin top due to those link buttons, those hyperlinks. 14, 15 pixels. Now, if we had set these to display block and float left or display inline block, we could apply that margin top property to this one. So if we go in, just to verify real fast, is about 13 pixels, so 15's a decent compromise. Okay, so we are nearly complete on this piece. All we need to do is our advertisers, which we already have the images on the page. We need to set the height and width of each image. We need to add the background to them too. So dot advertisers. And then li image. clear both, just in case if we had a fifth element here could have problems. Well, no, our subheader takes care of that by clearing out all of our floats. But just for good measure, we're going to add it there. We have that gradient background image, which is advertising background. Each one of the elements is going to float left. Have a margin of, oh, we don't need a margin on them. The height is 130 and width is 160. So just to back that up from the background image. So there we have everything lined up properly. Now I just want to double check real fast, and so we want to make sure all of our images actually render the way that we expect them to. 159, 160, 61. So we're going to give them a height and width. .160 pixels. I'm sorry, that's a width of 160 and a height 131. We also need to set it to display block so that it respects those heights and widths. So it skewed a couple of them. I didn't get all of them cut out exactly the same, but that's okay. So there you have it. We have our whole website cut out, minus some footer elements, which were pretty straightforward to cut out. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys if you're following along. Now the big thing we're going to code next is our rotator. I'm not sure if this is going to take 1 or 2 videos. I want to really go through how relative positioning works and how we lay out a rotator, and then we're going to code out the JavaScript on it and show you guys how to write a jQuery plugin. A very simple one. It's not going to be the most advanced one, but it's going to be relatively limited to this usage, but it'll be helpful. So anyway, thank you for the watch. We'll see you guys on the next one.